The opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
The Paranormal View. The Paranormal View. The Paranormal View. Time now for the Paranormal View. The Paranormal View on the Para X Radio Network. The Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody to the Paranormal View right here on the Para X Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Those in the chat room, we're glad you are here, and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one of you. Tonight, we got a wonderful guest, and we'll be getting right into that shortly here. But if you are listening from somewhere other than here in the chat room, then you are welcome to come over to para-x.com and just click on the join the chat, and you'll be in here with all these wonderful people. You'll be able to interact with us and ask questions of our guests, or guest, I should say. And you'll have a wonderful time tonight. Last week we had a great show, and this week we've got one. And I'll tell you more about next week's show toward the end of this one, and you'll like it also. With that, because we do have a lot to cover tonight, Jeff, why don't you do an intro?
Absolutely. Well, our guest tonight is Freddy Silva, who is one of the world's leading researchers of sacred sites, ancient systems of knowledge, and the interaction between temples and consciousness. He's the best-selling author of First Templar Nation and Divine Blueprint. His first book, Secrets in the Field, The Science and Mysticism of Crop Circles, has been published in 4 languages and provides the only thorough appraisal of this much misunderstood phenomenon. Freddy has also directed several documentaries, including but not limited to Stairways to Heaven, The Practical Magic of Sacred Space, Templemaking, and In the Footsteps of Isis. For over a decade, he has lectured worldwide with keynote appearances at the International Science and Consciousness Conference, the International Society for the Study of Subtle Energies and Energy Medicine, and the Association for Research and Enlightenment, as well as appearances on Discovery Channel, BBC, and radio shows such as Coast to Coast, and saving the best for right now, The Paranormal View. So welcome, Freddy Silva.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back.
Anytime. You're always one of those guests that we like to have come back.
That's good to know.
The last time that we had you on, though, we was talking about crop circles, because you had a book on that also. But tonight, we're off like in a different highway, you might say. And it's, I guess, kind of unusual, but then when you find out where you are from, it makes a lot of sense. Tonight, we're going to start out by talking about one of your new books, The Divine Blueprint. And I think what I'd like to find out to start with was, how did you get started down the road looking at the Knights Templar and the Holy Grail?
Oh, that's the other book.
Well, they both kind of go together, but yeah.
But I can talk about that too if you like, but I think you want to get down to the Divine Blueprint way.
Right, that's fine.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Divine Blueprint and then go to the Knights Templar.
Exactly.
Right.
Although, ironically, they're all very intertwined, as they are intertwined with crop circles, believe it or not. Usually when you do these projects, you have, in a way, you have no idea where you're going at the end, or where it goes off. I was just amazed to find that at the end of crop circles, my mind began to veer back towards sacred space and ancient places of veneration, and found out really how much similar they are to crop circles, and also why the crop circles have this uncanny ability to always appear, no matter where they appear around the world, which is now 29 countries, always appear beside ancient sacred sites as if they're trying to tell us something. And that got me interested back into sacred sites again. And I've been drawing pyramids since I was 3, so I guess, it's my sort of contention that we're all born and we come here to Earth to do something specific. And I think that when you start drawing pyramids at 3, and you have no interest in playing childish games with other kids, that you're obviously here to do something else, which makes life a little bit difficult and yet paradoxically interesting at the same time. So it was really a matter of extending the concept of how these little portals of energy work. In one degree, you have crop circles appearing on the magnetic lines that cross the face of the Earth, and on another degree, you have places like Stonehenge and the pyramids, the temples of Angkor in Cambodia. All of these places essentially are concrete crop circles where they actually been man-made to take in the energy at these places, and essentially they're creating their own portals of energy. So we're talking about here about something that's very common, and it's a shared technology that goes back thousands of years. That got you quiet.
No. Can't do more than one thing at a time for some reason. I don't know why. My brain doesn't work that way.
Well, I'm curious as a correlation there, if the crop circles are appearing because the energy is already there and somehow it's tapped into that same energy.
Well, actually, that's a very good question. Yes, it is. It's one of the things that I really got out of analyzing crop circles for a decade was this reference to ancient sacred sites. When the dowsers came in and started thinking that, perhaps these things are appearing at the crossing points of the Earth's meridians, and it turns out that, yes, they were. And then the fact that we had 80 eyewitnesses around the world that were saying, well, we sometimes see beams of light coming down from the sky. They rotate the crop circle appears in front of us. And I'm talking about people who are, farmers and policemen. These are no-nonsense people. They're not into little green men. So when they see beams of light and little balls of light making things in front of them that they can't explain, it's worthwhile listening to what they have to say. But here's the funny thing about these eyewitnesses. They said that sometimes the crop circle doesn't appear in front of them. It comes back 24 hours later. So it seems to be that there was a correlation going on between an imprinting of energy, but also an awakening of the Earth as well. And here's the interesting correlation. In the last 15 years, I have seen, and this can be easily validated, a huge rise in attendance in sacred spaces around the world. I mean, people are just suddenly gravitating to ancient sacred sites like no other time before. And I don't think that has anything to do with an aging population having more money to travel. I see young people, middle-aged people, they all suddenly feel attracted as though something's woken up. And I was very much sort of into the belief that, yes, there is a correlation going on here, that we are attracted to temples for some amazing reason. Well, it's interesting that about 2,000 years ago, when the Roman Catholic Church showed up in Europe, they began to shut down the sacred sites. We haven't really built sacred sites for the first time in history for 2,000 years, and suddenly the crop circles show up. They're built exactly on the same principles as a pyramid, as a Stonehenge, and it was really by chance that I was working on the energy imprints of sacred sites in England, not knowing that only a few months later, real crop circles would appear beside the temples I had just measured energetically, and found that when the circles appeared, they carried their own blueprint of energy, which can be measured. And this blueprint was able to traverse along these magnetic lines, and it actually began to change and alter what was already present at the local sacred sites. So in a way, these imprints are awakening something in the temples that has been sitting there, waiting, that has been dormant for quite some time. So the proof is the fact that so many people suddenly feel the need to attend these sacred sites, and inevitably that might just lead to an awakening.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were talking in your on your website a little bit about people who go to different sacred sites, and you find the one that you're interested in is almost like having a PIN number.
Oh,
and
yeah.
and I find that interesting because astrologically, people are made up of different types of energy. Some people are water energy, some people are fire energy. Do you find correlations astrologically with the type of people and the type of sacred sites that are out there? are there such things as more water sites, fire sites, earth sites?
Oh, very much so. I don't know about the correlation astronomically, but it would not surprise me at all, because when you come down to it, it's just a matter of geometry and numbers, and that's what we're all made of. And when you look at the temples, as I've done for so long, and began to question why some people go to the Great Pyramid, and there's a perfectly good pyramid next door to the one in Giza, and some of them go in there and they come out looking a bit sort of, well, not well. Some come out looking as if they've just met God, and then you put them into the pyramid next door, and they have a completely different reaction. And that's where suddenly the penny dropped, and I began to wonder, is there something about the combination of forces at these places, the geometry in which they're built, the stone, and etc. And then I began to realize that, yes, there are subtle differences between the pyramids, for example, because we tend to see them all as a pyramid, but they're not. You look at the slope angles of the pyramids in Giza and all throughout Egypt, and they're all ever so slightly different. And I've taken tour groups for as long as I can remember to these places, and I don't tell anybody anything. I don't like to suggest things. I like people to come up with their own ideas and experiences. And then just by sort of watching their behavior, it's quite obvious that some people go into one building and they feel completely enlightened. And it literally is as if the building reads this sort of pin number that you're born with, and the combination of forces, geometry, and the type of stone in the building act as a kind of facilitator, kind of a machine that allows you to enter that space and have a direct contact with it. And the people who don't, they basically just leave, or they leave very ill for a very short amount of time. It's as if the building's trying to tell them that this one really isn't for you. You should go to the one down the road, because that one's still slightly different. You probably would like that one. And I see it happening again and again and again. And if you look at the ancient mysteries and the schools and what they taught, they said exactly the same thing, that each temple is designed specifically for different people to have different experiences at different times.
Now, it comes down to sacred geometry, though, because the Mayan pyramids, which are basically the same type of shape, attract a different type of person.
Absolutely. And even the slopes are slightly different. And the orientation, it also has something to do with it. So it's a sort of combination of different elements that goes on in these places, which allows for a certain environment. And it's the best analogy I can draw is, for example, if you're a person that likes punk music and you walk into a record store, and I know they're getting very rare these days, but if you can go back 10 years, there were a lot of record stores.
Yeah.
You go into a record store and someone's playing classical music. Well, there's nothing wrong with classical music, but if you walk in with a certain, your body being charged by punk, then you're not going to like what you're going to hear, and you're going to either not feel right, or you're going to walk away. And the same thing will happen if a person that likes classical goes into a hard rock store. They might not have that kind of experience because the sound of the place will be jarring. And that's the best analogy I can draw, but I can say hand on heart that the people that do go to these places, that it's as if the place actually calls out to them. And I hear this again and again on trips where people felt that, for years I wanted to go to Britain, I wanted to go to Stonehenge, but now I really have to go.
Yeah.
It's as if the building is actually calling to them, and it's figuring out who they are. The building knows who you are from a long, long way away. There's a sort of umbilical cord that connects us to these places. And suddenly you find yourself in this environment at the right place at the right time, and you come out a very, very different person from when you walked in.
Well, I know that. Well, even in the Da Vinci Code, they talked briefly about the Catholic Church and building churches along certain lines themselves, with the saints being in a certain ley line. So even they were to a certain degree.
They also tended to build them over pagan meeting sites,
exactly.
So that pagans would show up for their Sabbaths and say, "What's this doing here?" And like, "Oh, by the way, you're going to be Christian now." "Oh, are we?"
It's funny that Dan Brown and I were actually neighbors in New Hampshire for about a year when I moved there.
Wow.
And we'd be the only two people walking the beach at low tides. Obviously, two writers desperately looking for inspiration. So I guess he must have picked some of my stuff, because I was writing about that stuff that went to his book. So thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. It is true. There were people within the church. In fact, there is a double story to this. I mean, I'm not a great fan of the Catholic Church per se, but then again, you can't generalize too much about everything. I do think, and I have met good people who are working within the church to maintain a certain connection to the pagan beliefs. This is why you find more images of the green man in churches in Europe than you do of Jesus. You can't explain that unless someone within the buildings wants to maintain that connection. And yes, when they were superimposing the churches on the original pagan sites, it was to essentially get people to go to church because no one was doing it. I mean, they realized that for thousands of years they went to these standing stones, sacred wells, and what have you, and something really worked for them. It did something to them, as it still does today. So in an effort to try and capitalize on this, the church put their buildings on top of the old sites. But the funny thing is, when you go around Europe, especially, you'll see that someone, in most cases, trying to maintain a connection to the old ways. And there's one particular dolmen, which is a series of very large standing stones in Portugal, where if you the church actually built a concrete entrance in front of this dolmen, put an oak door and a little bell tower, try to disguise it, but you walk into the middle of this tower, and it's quite obvious that the 28-foot stones, which weigh over 100 tons each, can't be disguised. And yet when you go in, there's a little altar to the Divine Virgin, and you think, well, there's nothing unusual about that. But it was exactly the feminine principle that was being honored at this site for the last 3,000 years. And there are two of the Earth's magnetic feminine lines that actually cross at that site. So as much as they try to eradicate these connections, someone somewhere, a good soul, would always try to maintain the connection so that they would never go away.
Interesting. Now, you talked briefly when you were bringing up the analogy of people walking into record stores and different types of music and how it affects us, and the energy and the vibration that come off of different types of music. Do you think it's possible for people to create their own divine site by introducing different vibrations like water sounds or different types of music or different types of basically vibrations?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually one of the things that I actually teach. After about 15 years of looking at sacred sites, they begin to talk back to you. And I began to wonder, being a very practical person, if you can't take a person to the sacred site, can you bring the sacred site to the person? And once I figured out that virtually all the temples in the world are built on 7 laws, and I call it the law of correspondence because the way that the temples work is because they correspond so closely to universal principles of nature. And it's to do with water, it's to do with magnetism, sacred geometry, the shape of the actual building itself, the way it echoes, so sound plays a part in it, the orientation, and then, of course, finally, the intent that you bring into it, because you're part of that temple, too. Mm-hmm. And I began to actually simplify this down to where you take a few quartz crystals and you arrange them in a certain place. In this case, in my living room, from where I'm speaking, there is a pentagonal temple in my living room which acts exactly in the same way as the Great Pyramid. And I guarantee you that the center of this geometry, where the actual energy hotspot is that I've created, it didn't take me more than half an hour to do this. People will always come and sit down exactly on that spot, despite the fact that there are 8 different places to sit in the entire room. And they know that there's something unusual about this room. It feels very different to the rest of the building. And I don't tell them anything. They can't see the stones that I've placed and secretly hidden in bookshelves and things. But it's palpable, it's tangible, and that's where I do a lot of my work. So, yes, I do teach this to people. In fact, I actually, when people can't go to the workshops, I actually did a DVD called Templemaking. And all the instructions are in there, and the feedback that I get from people, where they put these things and what they do with them, sometimes they create healing centers out of them. The feedback is quite remarkable. There was one gentleman that created an entire pentagonal temple 40 miles wide across Nova Scotia. And this may seem unusual, but we have the same thing in southern Britain as well. You have to actually use Google Earth to figure it out and use local folklore to see which temples lined up with each other. And once you put that together, you realize that the ancients worked on a massive scale sometimes. These things could only be best appreciated from the sky. But yet in Nova Scotia, this man went out with GPS, put stones in specific locations, anchor them according to the geometry of the pentagram, the symbol of life, and he's trying to influence a certain area where he feels the energy is so dark and so mashed up that it's making people feel ill. And apparently the effects are beginning to be felt right now. That there is a certain vibration, a certain resonance in that part of the country, and people, without realizing that this has happened, are beginning to react to it. So these things that were built for us thousands of years ago certainly are alive and well. There's no reason why none of us can recreate this in their living rooms, in their verandas, in their backyards, even across an entire city like Washington, D.C. That's based on the same laws as Stonehenge, as any other temple in the world. And of course, it depends who's in power in Washington, because some of the presidents in this country, they realized that this stuff really works. Some didn't, but quite a lot of them did, being Freemasons. And depending on who's in power, you can see how the country goes from right action to wrong action within every general election, and that's quite true.
Now, the temples that were built around the world, not all of them are still standing, but the ones that are not standing, is there power still in those areas?
Just a little bit. The thing you have to understand with the man-made temples, and particularly when they use large upright rocks, is that the rocks were put there deliberately to anchor the magnetic energy to stop it from drifting. These energy lines are everywhere. The military has found them. NASA even admitted that they exist. It was on their website back in 2001. In fact, I even published the quote on there. It was quite amazing. I couldn't believe they wrote that. And so the energy moves around. It succumbs to the power of the moon, the sun, the tides, the Earth's core, and even people's intent. I can, in a few minutes, teach you very easily how to move these energy lines. So because they move, they have to be anchored, and the stones were used to make sure they wouldn't move. So when the temple falls into decay and the stones start being put down, yes, to some degree, the coherence of the site starts falling apart. The geometry starts getting out of whack. But this will take hundreds of years, sometimes thousands, because these places are so old and they were so worked and loved that the intent of the people kept that energy there. So you can go to Stonehenge still today and realize that half of the place is missing and the stones are fallen over. But believe me, when you walk inside, that place is still active, it's still alive. And part of it is to do with the people that go there and still maintain the connection to the site. They venerate the site, and that helps the energy stay. You'd have to completely obliterate the site to make the energy go away yet again.
But don't they have Stonehenge pretty much roped off? You can't really go up and touch the stones anymore?
Actually, no. I'm taking 3 groups there next year, and we're all going to go up and touch the stones. You just got to pay English Heritage a little bit of money, and they are cutting back the visits for many times. I mean, I used to go there 10 years ago at 9 o'clock at night and spend 2 hours, talk to the guards. They're very interesting people, full of great stories, and these are sort of Green Berets who are now retired. So these people they're not into woo-woo.
No, for a moment there, when you said talk to the guards, I heard talk to the gods.
Oh, you can do that too. Believe me, you can do that too.
Which is why it came to my mind, why I heard it that way. So.
And in this case, the guards are the gods, so you've got to treat them nicely. Exactly. And then when you do, not only do they give you a very good cup of tea, but they do talk about military helicopters chasing balls of light around Stonehenge, which are traveling at phenomenal speed. I mean, I've seen them too, and believe me, it'll change your life when you see these things.
Wow.
Oh, they're probably just trying to get into the Pandorica. Oh, wait.
Yeah. In your book about crop circles, didn't they build there was a crop circle not too far from Stonehenge?
It's one of the most famous cases, actually. Back in 1996, there had been about 80 eyewitnesses. Most of them most of the crop circles appeared during the daytime hours of 2 and 4 in the morning, but there are those few cases when people do see them in bright daylight. And this was one such case. And in order to paint a picture of what's going on here to anyone who doesn't know, Stonehenge sits on a 35-foot elevated plain. You have a perfect view around it for 360 degrees. And only a few hundred yards away, there is Britain's highway, which connects the center of Britain to the south. And of course, being Britain, it's one lane going north and one lane going south. So about 5:15 in the afternoon one Sunday, there's 1,000 people walking around Stonehenge looking at the stones. A few hundred yards away in a wheat field, a crop circle suddenly manifests in less than 15 seconds. And we know it happened very quickly in bright daylight because the guards go around every 15 minutes and they look around, making sure that no one's jumped the fence. And they went around at 5 o'clock, 5:15, nothing there. They came back at 5:30, and there's a huge spiral made of 149 logarithmic circles in a perfect concave spiral suddenly laid out in front of them. And unless hoaxers were levitating above the field and playing with invisibility, there's no way they could have been caught. No one saw anything, except for one cab driver who was actually going northbound at that moment. He states that quite clearly he was jammed on his brakes, which is a very dangerous thing to do on a main highway in Britain when everybody travels at 100 miles per hour. And he jammed on his brakes. It caused a major tailback for 5 miles. And he stood on the hood of his car, and he saw this beam of light come straight out of the clouds like a cookie cutter. And he said that the whole field was filled with this mist, as if there was some kind of a heating effect going on. And within seconds, there's a crop circle in front of him when the mist lifts, and that took less than 30 seconds. So we actually have an eyewitness now that actually saw the whole thing happening. Lucky man.
Now we have got questions coming in all over from the chat room, and I think Kat, you said you had one first, so why don't you get yours out?
I have one, and also Kat in our chat room. We both had the same brilliant question, which was, do different pyramid constructs, i.e. slope, step, mound, flat top, etc., create different vibrations? Are there different vibrations in different places depending on the reasons built?
Absolutely. Each one is built to a different ratio, a different environment, a different orientation, and of course latitude has something to do with it as well. So basically, they're all designed to do very different things. Again, it's like having a stash of records in your library, and you pick out one because you happen to be feeling a bit sort of moody one day, or you pick out another pyramid because you want to feel a bit more elevated. And again, the texts are very clear that each space was designed to elicit different feelings. And all you have to do really is look at, for example, the way that energy moves around a slope rather than a step pyramid or even a conical mound. Energy behaves in very, very different ways. And that begins this sort of sensory activation of your electrodes on your skin as you approach it. And anyone that's been to one of these places pretty much knows that the feeling of excitement hits you about a quarter of a mile away. You barely had a chance to see the place, and the place already knows you're there. And there's an interaction between your energy field and the building. It's like two radio stations trying to tune into each other. So yes, they do alter. And of course, if you had inner chambers, if you do measurements of the inner chambers, you also find that they're all designed to slightly different musical notes. I believe the inner chamber of the most famous pyramid, the Giza pyramid, is designed exactly to mimic the pure octave. So it's a 2-to-1 ratio in music.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Now, does that does that arrangement then set the tone for how the energy moves within the pyramid?
Sorry, how the
energy moves within the pyramid, because obviously, it doesn't just flow through, but I assume it surrounds it somehow, and energy is kinetic, so it must move in a certain pattern within each of these geometry sites.
Oh, very much so. If we look at some of the eyewitnesses of the Arabs in the early 20th century, they kept noticing how energy builds up around the pyramid in Giza and moves in a certain conical fashion all the way up to the top, and then discharges in what they call the jinn, these elemental spirits. The different thing happens in the man-made pyramid in England. It's called Silbury Hill. It's not really a pyramid per se, it's actually a conical mound, but essentially it's another phallic object that's pointing towards the heavens. And on one very lucky occasion, I was lucky enough to be driving by it and saw this big discharge of energy come out straight out of the actual summit, very different to the one in Giza where the energy goes around the sides of the pyramid and then it goes to the top. In this particular case, the energy seems to have just manifested within the mound. It's about 180 feet tall, and then it stood there like a big ball of light, about 30 feet across. It was the most intense orange color I've ever seen, surrounded by a green halo. And I've seen enough military flares in my lifetime to know that that was not a military flare. And it stood there for about 45 seconds, and then it just burst like a big bubble. It had little dots, like those yellow dots that you find on apples, circling all around it. Absolutely magical. And I know physicists who've seen these things happen all over the place. So that's just a sort of an example of how two different pyramids, and I'll put that in inverted commas, can move the energy within and without to behave in a very different way. So you can imagine what happens, for example, when you go to the bent pyramid, which has two different angles, and the chamber goes under the ground. I can tell you the energy there is very, very different from what you'll find in any other place because, again, it is designed to stimulate certain parts of your anatomy that are not designed in other places.
Mm-hmm. So the pyramids, say, in Central America, which aren't really designed with inner chambers, but pretty much all the activity happens outside, they're going to have a different vibration to them.
Yes, and even the sculptures that they have there form part of that design as well. I mean, for example, when you have serpents which are sticking their tongues out at you, that's usually an old concept for energy, for earth energy. So that has a part to play in the overall design too. And in fact, I would even guess that some of the chambers in those places have not yet been found. They did design these things deliberately so they would not be found by idiots like us in the 21st century who have completely lost the plot. And in fact, in Egypt, they did actually write quite clearly in the walls of one of the temples that until people recognize that they are responsible people and they recognize that they are the temple, we will go on building temples. So I think at some point, and there is lots of evidence to show for this in Europe, where the sites were shut down around the time, in fact, even about 1,000 years before the Catholic Church showed up, they did see that the sites would be misused. There was a change in culture, a complete change in our psychology. And I suspect that even in South America, they hid their most important chambers very, very well. And it would take some very clever people and some people with great responsibility to find them once again.
Does the energy that surrounds different types of sacred sites dictate the type of circles that may appear outside of them?
Oh, now that's a reverse thinking question. I don't know, to be honest. I do know that the crop circles that appear next to the sacred sites influence and alter the energy of the local sacred space with which they're interacting with. That is a given. Whether it's working the other way around, not impossible to prove, has not yet been proven yet, but I can say that some of the eyewitnesses to crop circles appearing do mention that when these tubes hit the ground and nothing happens, and they come back 24 hours later and they see a crop circle exactly where that tube was before, that there's a crop circle there. Now, these designs rotate counter and clockwise, and I didn't give it too much thought until I was reading a report from the Russian physicists who are way ahead of anybody when it comes to this kind of stuff. They were looking into the action of biodynamic cultures, and they were saying how when you work with biodynamic cultures and specific liquids, when you actually rotate the water one way, it inputs energy, and when you rotate it the other way, it actually expels energy. So this brings us back to your question. Some crop circles are clockwise, some are counterclockwise. And it seems to me that a lot of the people that see the tubes and don't see the crop circle manifest immediately, it's as though the earth is actually pushing something out of the ground. Something has gone into the earth and the earth has fired back. So could it be then that the local sacred site has been activated and the site itself has given the word go to allow the circle then to manifest? It's quite possible and not improbable.
Jeff, did you have a question also from the chat room?
Actually, yeah, Nyla was curious. Have you felt any more of a personal connection with any certain specific sacred sites yourself?
All of them. I get asked this a lot, actually. And you know what? It goes back to what I was saying earlier. It depends what mood I'm in and what I'm looking for. Each one of them is designed to elicit a different response, and it's mostly shamanic, by the way. I often get asked by Daniel Pinchbeck and Graham Hancock to go and investigate ayahuasca, and I'll let everybody figure that one out for themselves. And after hearing about so many of the side effects that come before you actually have a major shamanic vision with ayahuasca, I'm thinking, I get the same result standing next to large upright rocks without the necessary bodily functions that come with drinking ayahuasca, because they're not very pleasant. So for me, it's a matter of what it is that I'm looking for. And again, I'm always surprised how I could be sitting here at my desk and I'm planning next year's activities and the sacred sites that I want to go to. And I'm thinking about what I'm actually looking for in terms of work, and inevitably I will be drawn to the exact places and the exact temples which will provide me the answers I'm looking for. And they'll change each year. So I love the Bent Pyramid in Egypt. It's one of my favorites. It always will be. I could sit here talking all night about the Bent Pyramid and the fact that it's not a mistake and it's easily provable. But yet, next year, I'll be going down to South America looking at other sacred sites, because that's where my energy is going now. So, as though I'm a radio station looking to tune into a certain piece of information, like we're doing right now, I will go to these different, I'll put my intent out into the universe, and eventually all those sites that are associated with my quest will suddenly pop into my consciousness. And inevitably, that's where I will be drawn to, and that's where the doors will open to allow me to get there. So those will be my sacred site, my favorite sites at the moment at which I need them. But I have to say, some of them would surprise you. They're actually some of the simplest places in the world. There is one on the Scottish island of Mull, and it's on the west coast of Scotland. It's on the way to Iona, and there's a tiny, tiny, insignificant stone circle made of 9 stones there. You have to cross a marsh. You'll probably sort of fall flat on your face once or twice, and that's fine. When you get there, leave all your electrical equipment outside. It will fry all your cameras, and I guarantee you it's one place on Earth where the gap between you and the Creator, whatever you want to call it, God, whatever, fairies, is the one place on Earth where the gap between you and the creative force of the universe is so thin, you will break down in tears, and you will never forget it.
Wow.
And yet it seems almost insignificant when you go there and you think, I traveled all this way to look at these 9 rocks. Well, they did that for a reason. Sometimes the things that least attract attention are the most powerful ones. It's like going to Giza. Everybody's so fascinated with the Great Pyramid. And you know what? For all his faults, Zawi Hawass, whenever you caught him off guard and you asked him, Zawi, what do you think about the Little Pyramid? And you see a different person walking to that body, something very spiritual. It's almost you can see sort of a tear in his eye. He's very emotional about that building. And that's the building that always gets my attention when I get to the Giza Plateau. And hardly anyone pays attention to it. Wow. And I believe most of the secrets of the pyramids on Giza are in and or under that tiny little insignificant pyramid,
Wow.
Now, I have a question about more natural type of sites, like you're mentioning Scotland, such as Sidonia, which is picking up, and people say that is holding a lot of energy now.
It is. In fact, when I was first researching the Divine Blueprint, I actually wanted to go back into the origin of what makes temples what they are. And the more I kept pushing the envelope, the more I realized the places that we see today are all built on original, or what they used to call primordial mounds. These were the effulgent power places of an energy that came from a creative force. And every single culture on Earth talks about this, how before there were man-made temples, there were these primordial mounds that show the full power of creation in its entity, in its entirety. And these were essentially landscape temples. In this country, Sedona, places around New Mexico, places that you and I don't see with the naked eye. We see it with an inner vision, like Native American people tend to do. These are what I call landscape temples. These were the original sacred places. And they are very potent. There are a couple of places in Sedona which are indeed very potent. A lot of them are, they're tourist attractions,
sure.
And you can read into that what you may. But certainly Bell Rock, and to a slightly less extent Cathedral Rock. But Bell Rock has been very, very potent for the Sinawa people for thousands of years. And there is a definite, I can only describe it as a sort of a junction box for energy lines. There's so many of the Earth's meridians going into that rock that it sets your hair on end as soon as you get there. And in fact, from a slight distance, when it's backlit, it kind of looks like a UFO. So these natural energies are everywhere. And in fact, there's one outside of Santa Fe. It's owned by the Tewa people. It's called Sikumu. It's the sacred hill. And you go there and you think, well, where is it? Well, it's not there physically, but when you actually allow yourself to just feel the earth around you, you'll feel there's something very profound on one of the particular parts of that place. And I can't really say where it is because I'm sworn to secrecy, but local people will tell you where it is if they find out that you're doing the right thing. They don't want the energy to be polluted.
Right.
So you go there and you stand there, and it's just like sitting in the middle of Stonehenge. It's the same energy. It's the same connection to this vast well of information of what I can only describe as pure love in some ways. And there's a wonderful creation myth that the Hopi describe, and it tells you exactly the connection between sacred space and these beautiful landscape temples where this energy seems to appear naturally. And the creation myth goes something like this, that once the created people, he or she sent one of these people down to the South Pole with a drum. As you do when you go to the South Pole, you take a drum with you. And
just to annoy the penguin.
Yes, forget the boots, take the drum. This person begins to hear the heartbeat of the earth and starts beating in sympathetic resonance. Well, when the earth starts hearing the beat of the drum, it starts sending out rays of energy to the surface, and suddenly the earth becomes abundant with life and energy. And they called, and they looked at this energy and realized that the earth was a creative entity. But the creation myth says there were some spots on the face of the earth that were more abundant with this energy than others, and they were called the spots of the fawn. And these marked the location of the original sacred sites, which when people forgot the story of creation, men would build temples on top of them, so we will always know where to go.
Now, I've got a question. But I think what we'll do is I'll wait till we come back from break, because it is break time. And I'll ask it when we come back.
Yeah, because I only have about 150 more questions.
Yeah, so do I.
I mean, the subject is so immense that once you tap into it, the doors keep opening and opening and opening. It's what they call being part of the mystery schools. You are actually now involved in the mystery secrets, and we're touching on very light levels here.
Yeah.
But this is stuff that was guarded with your life back in the old days, and still is to some degree.
Yeah,
but you can see how you get drunk on it. It just feeds you, and you keep going back and again.
More and more, yeah. Well, I guess what we'll do is see Kat. I guess it's going to be you. So we're going to take us a break about 8 minutes, somewhere around there, 10 minutes maybe. And we will be right back with more. So, Kat?
Okay, everyone. You are listening to The Paranormal View with your hosts, Henry Foister, Jeffrey Gold, Barbara Duncan, and myself, Kat. Tonight, our guest is Freddy Silva, author of The Divine Blueprint. There's more fascinating bits after the break.
Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making Para X part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, Para X.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Paranormal View here on Para X Radio. And we'd like to thank all of our listeners here in the United States, in the United Kingdom, Ireland, Australia, Canada, and France. Welcome all. And we'd like to welcome back our special guest, Freddy Silva, author and the person responsible for my insomnia tonight, because I'm going to be up thinking about all of the stuff we're talking about right now.
And just for fun, we're all going to change accents.
Okay.
Well, now I
can talk like this if you'd like,
And Jeffrey can do the same thing too. Yeah.
I have to get ready for my London trip. So.
Ready for coffee talk.
Now I've got a question from Rookie in the chat room. and he wanted to know what was their purpose for creating different moods in people.
Creating different moods in people. So they can become more confusing. I think what they mean is to create different energies in people. If that's the case, then the whole idea, and I'll backtrack here for a second, every single ancient culture that's ever existed, and that includes esoteric societies, secret societies. These are the ones that are working for right action, by the way, not the ones who are trying to control the world. They recognize the human condition for what it is. It's the soul that's trapped in a physical vessel. And the whole purpose of living your life was to do everything possible to establish a connection as soon as possible, as early as possible in your life, so that you'd have a revelation of God, for lack of a better word. And that revelation connected you with a much greater universe of information, of experience, of sensitivities, sounds, smells, etc. And once you define a good level of competence with getting out of the body and having these shamanic moments or inspirational moments, the more you realize that you have a certain degree of self-control over the world around you, your thoughts. And when you have control over that, you have control over energy, natural laws, and you can, to a certain degree, live your life conscious of what's around you, and you can manifest things in a way that's according to your higher self. This was the central aim of every single society on Earth that was trying to achieve a higher spiritual aim. So to answer the question, the purpose of all of these sites was to get you to have these different experiences, these shamanic moments where you would, for a few minutes to a whole weekend, be in a refined state where the energies were such that would allow your soul to communicate with a much finer universe and hopefully come back with information that was of great importance. So they had a word for it. It was actually called the raising of the dead. Which it sounds very sinister at first, but it's really to do with the concept of resurrection. And as the Gospel of Thomas quite clearly points out, and I quote, those who believe they have to die before they resurrect are in error. One has to experience resurrection while still in the body. And he was talking about one of the initiation principles that even people like Jesus were privy to have these moments where you do connect with an outside force which allows you to become knowledgeable that you are much greater than the sum of your parts. Mm-hmm. So by waking different parts of your physical body and slowly getting them reconnected back into the spiritual matrix, you do become much more superabundant. You then have to be very careful about things such as your ego, your thoughts, because you start manifesting things around you, and unless you have a degree of control of this, you can, develop, well, you can develop into a maniac, for one thing, a complete demigod, and a complete sort of fascist dictator. And a lot of these people in the early era in the European history quite clearly showed that they were very much into the supernatural, and they wanted to learn what the esoteric people had known in order to gain control and power of entire nations. The last ones we know about only happened about 80 years ago. They're called the Nazis. They were looking for exactly the same stuff that you and I have been looking for to have a spiritual moment, and it was all to do with power and control. So that's the reason why you'd want to go to these places. You'd want to awaken yourself, recognize you are no longer the walking dead. You are now aware that you are a living being inside a body that's connected to a far greater universe than you're usually aware of in your waking moments. And that's a very good thing. And it's a dangerous thing, and it's a powerful thing at the same time. But a sensible person that's in charge of this information knows exactly how good and how much good can be done with it.
Now, would that be similar to like what they say in the Bible about being born again in the spirit?
In a way, although it has been misused recently for entirely religious reasons. Most of the people that are discussing this concept of being born again really are in error. It's just a matter of interpretation of the Bible, whether it's literal or whether it's metaphorical. And it's quite clear that people that originally wrote this book and the books that actually make up the Bible, most of the good ones being the ones that were banned, and that's where you'll find the juicy stuff. they do quite clearly maintain that all of these stories and concepts were all allegories and metaphors. They're not supposed to be taken literally. In fact, they actually discussed, and this is going back to the Gospel of Thomas again, the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, they said quite clearly that anyone who believes in organized religion and also the rising of the body after a crucifixion, you're believing in a faith of fools. And he actually says and uses those exact words. The whole thing is supposed to be metaphorical. It's supposed to be a description of very complex concepts, which you and I would spend 5, 10, sometimes 20 years understanding before you were allowed out of the building with these ideas so you can go and practice on your own. They were very serious. This stuff can be very, very dangerous if used in the wrong hands. And in my years of working with this stuff, I have seen both ways. I mean, hopefully I'm wise enough to know when to use things for the right action and when not to go and use things for wrong action. I think I've done pretty well so far, and I've been a fairly good teacher at that. But again, it's about having a personal experience. It's about you being in total charge of yourself and being quite restrained with the way the energy is moved, just like in a way that you wouldn't want to move an atom bomb. It's one thing to create fireworks for make you happy. It's another thing to pack a lot of gunpowder in a metal object and blow up an entire nation with it. So it's the same thing. You're using the same repository of energy. It's how you handle it that makes the difference.
Now, were a lot of these temples built like on ley lines?
Yes and no. Most people's concept of the ley line is to do with energy. It's not. Energy lines and ley lines are two completely different things. The ley lines are geometric alignments between temples, and yes, they are aligned to the ley lines. But this is where it gets into a very gray area, because there's a lot of stuff on the internet and in a lot of books where people just sort of connect all of these dots and create these incredible things. And unfortunately, unless these sites are connected by a certain history or a certain concept or a certain idea, you can't just connect these things willy-nilly, because then you can create all of these magical ideas, but they're all coming from your own head. But once you start doing some serious research and connecting things which have a commonality about them, maybe they were used for exactly the same purposes, or they all have exactly the same geometry, then yes, there is a sort of a global plan that starts emerging quite clearly. And the more we start digging under the surface and discovering more ancient temples, like the one in Turkey, that incredible hill that's made of 18 different artificial stone circles. The name escapes me right now. But you start realizing that all this was part of a huge plan. And in fact, when I was talking to Graham Hancock a couple of years ago, when I was writing the Divine Blueprint, and I dedicated a chapter to how the most ancient sacred places in the world are aligned to a very specific grid, it suddenly dawned on me that he'd actually come up with the same concept years earlier. And without wanting to plagiarize him, I said, I'd actually approached this from a completely different angle that you did, but we came to exactly the same conclusion, and it's absolutely right. And it does show that when you actually take the numbers of the Earth, and this is to do with the wobble of the poles, which is the 25,000-year cycle, and you start dividing it by the geometry of the Earth, which is based on the pentagonal, the values of the pentagram, and you apply those as a grid based on those specific numbers of the pentagram, because only those numbers appear in that geometry. If you basically strike off all these longitudes, you do hit all the world's major and oldest sacred sites. So it does show that there is a very big ley alignment around the world, showing that there was a forethought to all of this. There was a long-conceived plan. And one of the reasons why they kept rebuilding on top of their sacred sites was to maintain this plan for perpetuity. So despite all the cataclysms that have befallen the Earth, and of course a typical human stupidity as well, we still have a lot of these sites available, enough of them to reconstruct the plan. And then you get a sense that there was at one point a very big mind behind this, as though they were trying to create self-help centers for the human race, so that when we lost the plot, we would know exactly where to go and how to reenact it.
Was that not the purpose, though, of some ceremonial or ritual? On the severe side, something like the Delphi oracles, where you went underground for sometimes a month in complete darkness to sweat lodges, which
totally.
which strip away some of that ego, and bring you back to shock, basically, with sensory overload in a lot of ways.
Oh, I totally agree. In fact, in the Greek times, there was a group of priests that were called the incubators, and they basically learned all of their stuff from the Egyptian mystery schools, which by then had fallen in decay. And they kept it going, and it was about a sensory deprivation program where the initiates would go after years of training. The middle training would be actually to get out of the body and see the world for what it really is. And yes, when you're in the dark, your pineal gland is working overtime, and your ego starts getting into all kinds of dead ends. You start seeing all kinds of demons and negative forces coming at you. But once you've actually stilled the mind and you've gotten rid of all that trash, now you're in a sort of a state of bliss, and that's when the interesting things start to happen. And it's just like driving a car. The more you do it, the more control you have consciously of where to go on these journeys of shamanic visions. So the sweat lodges would elicit exactly the same purpose, where for a couple of hours you would, under a certain guided meditation, reach out to these worlds, which are very real in their own level of reality as we are in ours, and you'd come back with some kind of information, some kind of message. Usually it was done, you'd start off your program by stating a certain intent or having a certain plan that you wanted to find, which then your subconscious takes into the spirit world, and by this magical process, you would then come back with the information that you requested in the first place. So yes, it's still going on today. Some of the initiations in the New Age world, as much as people make fun of them, if they're done correctly, they will elicit exactly the same response. People go into the Great Chamber in the Great Pyramid in Giza, and yes, if you pay people enough money, you will spend a whole night there. Some people have not come back into their body. They just do not realize the power of that chamber. And then the whole building gets shut down for 6 months because some idiot died inside that box. You can't just do this without realizing the consequences that comes with these buildings. There's a spiritual technology at work here. It can be dangerous if it's not used properly. So a fool will have unusual things happen to them, but a person that is aware and awake and intent, they will have the most incredible out-of-body experiences in these locations, and it will change your life. I can say that from a personal experience. I was raised as a Catholic. I developed insane atheist attitudes because of that, and you can't blame me. And I've now come back believing in God again because of my direct experiences at these sacred sites. And I can only say they've already been overwhelmingly positive.
So there's there's a possibility of a conscious and an unconscious preparation before you go to these sites. Some people do it instinctively, don't prepare properly. Those are the ones you're saying are getting into trouble.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there is a God that protects silly tourists, that they do have the right intent, and they go there with all the right reasons, and somehow they're protected from harm. And I've seen that a lot of times. Very innocent people that they want that experience, and they will get it. But they'll be brought back into the body pretty quickly within about 10 minutes, just to give them a hint of what is possible. And after that, you do your homework. You carefully go back and to part one and read the manual properly. Yeah, I do believe that there is a sort of a spirits or gods of silly people that do protect them from themselves.
We have another question in the chat room from Kat, who wants to know your thoughts on basically feng shui and room shapes and how they affect energy. And do you think that feng shui does work to correct that energy flow within our own homes?
Oh, I could tell you, but of course I'd have to kill you.
Okay.
It's feng shui, essentially. It comes from the same school of thought. It just happens to be the Chinese version of creating sacred space and moving energy and energy manipulation. It's in Rome. It was actually called the College of the Augurs, where these Augurs would actually treat a certain place, a certain part of the landscape, prior to actually even erecting the building, so that all the good portents and the forces that would then permeate the landscape would actually hold the building together. And just before the building was finally open for living in and for use, they would conduct a ceremony, which we today still have. It's called the inauguration. So the principle of feng shui is exactly based on the same movement of energy to make sure that I wouldn't call them negative energies. I say that they're energies which are not beneficial for the purpose of which you're trying to achieve would be moved from a certain landscape, and the ones that are beneficial to your intent would be driven there so that a purposefully designed building could be built which would promote health-giving properties. So, yes, this is part of a very, very old culture in China.
Now, there was temples built all over Europe, South America, Mexico. Were any built in the United States?
Not many. And I've always struggled with this. I wondered why until I went to Australia and recognized that they didn't build any temples down there at all. And you talk to a lot of Native American people and Aboriginal people, and a lot of them are still connected to the landscape, and that's why they didn't build anything, because they could see where the original landscape temples exist. They can see the energy. They don't have to build stuff. They'll just walk around in this meaningless desert, and suddenly they'll go, oh, I think I'm just going to sit here for about 12 hours for no reason at all, because it feels really good. I have a very funny word for this. It's getting the tingly-winglies. And it does. There's something about the energy at these sites. You have to have a sense of humor about all this, by the way. There's an energy at these sites which is detectable with very expensive equipment or bent coat hangers, otherwise known as dowsing rods. And it's an electromagnetic field, and your body is also an electromagnetic field. And when the two combined, you do start getting this subtle sense that someone's rubbing you very gently, and you do start feeling slightly different. These are what they call the spots of the fawn and the Hopi tradition. And of course, in the Australian outback, the Aborigines call them increase centers, because they're supposed to increase what they call the inner person or the great person that lives inside you. So that's the reason why they don't see that many here in North America, because the landscape is full of energy, and a good person who is in tune with it knows exactly where to go. However, having said that, if you happen to live in Ohio, there are wonderful mounds, and the most beautiful of which, of course, is Serpent Mound. And this comes, a lot of them actually come from a much older culture than the Cherokee, because the Cherokee claim that when they were moving across the Americas, they came across a dying breed, a dying race of people up in the Appalachia who were unusually tall, between 9 and 12 feet tall, and they had survived a huge cataclysm many thousands of years before, where their land in the middle of the sea to the east suddenly went under these enormous waves, and the survivors moved to what is today Georgia and some of the East Coast, and they traveled into the mountains, and there they bred. But because there were basically only a few of them, they had to interbreed, because they obviously couldn't do so with normal human women. And because of the interbreeding, they finally just phased out. But before they died out, the Cherokee took on all of their rituals and traditions and honored them and wanted to maintain them for posterity. And they still claim today that the original Serpent Mound and the mound culture of the Ohio was basically put there by these very, very tall people, and they had a name for them. They were called the Alawani. And if you happen to go to Pittsburgh and sit by the banks of one of its rivers, called the Allegheny, now you'll know where that name comes from. It honors that original tribe of giant people.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, I live here in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we have
is
a
that where
few
you are?
mounds actually in Island. And Henry is actually just north of me in Trenton. But we do have mounds here in the middle of the city. The closest one to me is in Norwood, which is about 5 miles away. So
Exactly.
yeah,
in fact,
and all of them are parks.
for all of you conspiracy theorists out there, if you go to the corner of First and Main in Cincinnati, and the biggest mound was actually there at one point. It is now the Procter & Gamble building. I'll let you draw the conclusions from that. In fact, a lot of the towns and cities in Ohio at the corner of Maine were exactly where the original mounds are. There's still quite a few in Columbus as well. In fact, I just came back from Columbus, and there's one called the Shrum Mound, and it's a beautiful and very happy little mound.
Now, we've talked about Earth being power centers. What about water? Because I know that for me, anyway, the ocean is a huge energy source.
Well, of course, moving water has that wonderful thing called negative ions, which is very, very good for you. Recharges your electrical system. In fact, I just came back from the beach today in Maine, which, if you can believe that, in November, that's quite astonishing. And I feel much more recharged today. But actually, water is the fundamental law of correspondence in every sacred space around the world. That was the thing I found fascinating, that before you start building anything, you have to have water. I even found this running, there are water courses running under the Great Pyramids. In the Monument Valley, which when you go there is not a drop of water to be seen anywhere, unless you look very closely. If you happen to find the spiritual elder there called Leroy, and there's a whole very funny story behind his name, which I won't go into. Lovely chap, and he took me between these two enormous sand dunes, and you sort of drive through them, and suddenly you're in the middle of the Navajo sacred site. You can't see it from the desert floor, and yet right there is this beautiful, crystal clear, gushing stream of water running for about 100 feet, and there's a big juniper tree, and right there is where their sacred site is. So even in the desert, the water is fundamental. And it's interesting because it goes back to what NASA was admitting a few years ago. And I'm trying to remember the original quote on their website. It said, whenever we are trying to find the Earth's telluric currents, which is basically the energy lines, we first locate underground veins of water because the water will attract the telluric currents. And it is true. Water and magnetism and electromagnetism go together very, very well. And these are the two fundamental principles of every sacred space in the world. So the water, essentially, is trapping the energy there. And if the energy starts rotating in spiral form, which it usually does, that adds another layer of energy to the site, because that also will stimulate an electrical field in water itself. So we may look at water as being a very ordinary substance, but when it comes to temples, it's the most important ingredient. And this is the reason why when you go to these places, you'll often find holy wells either adjacent to the buildings or inside them. And that water is called holy water for a good reason, because there's a W in front of it. It literally is whole. The water is charged. And when you make the sign of a cross in front of you, without getting too religious about it, or you imbibe the water, something gets charged inside your body as well. And we now know from the work of Masaru Emoto in Japan, who crystallized water, looked at the way that your intent changes the shape of the geometry of water. Well, if you take your intent into one of these sacred buildings and there's water running in it, under it, or next to it, your prayer will actually go to the water. So the next person that comes along will essentially be drinking the prayers and good wishes of the people that came before. But here's another very important thing. Because when you actually start generating water and spinning it at a very fast frequency, once it hits about 32.72 degrees Fahrenheit, it starts to actually excite the very water that's inside your own body. So you're drinking this holy water, you're feeling out of sorts, you've got to the sacred site to make yourself feel better. You're drinking this water, and it's starting to change the chemical structure of the most abundant element that's in your body, which of course is water.
Yeah.
So no wonder you feel good at these places. The water itself is charged. You're drinking the stuff, so you're beginning to get a little bit more energized as a result of it. And in fact, science have actually taken samples of holy water and water from holy wells, compared it to normal water, and they found that the water from sacred sites is very, very excited. It shows millions of little vortices whirling around at very, very fast speed, as though the water itself is alive and breathing and definitely energized.
Oh, I believe it. I have about a 16-year-old bottle of Glastonbury water. And
that stuff is wonderful.
It's still in great shape.
Start drinking it.
Now, of course, in a lot of the old ways, water meeting the shore, as you said, you went to the shore today, that's considered the tween places between the land and the sea, just as streams and such, which are very highly magical. And are you aware of the experiments where you take water and you put it in like a jar, and you put a word on the jar, like on a piece of paper, either a very positive word, very uplifting positive word or term, or a very negative word. And when you freeze that water, the crystalline structure takes on whatever that intent is. Like if you wrote happy or generous, it would be very like really pretty crystalline structure. But if it was something like anger or something, it would be like really ugly.
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning about the work of Masaru Emoto. He was the gentleman in Japan that actually showed that very clearly. And in fact, there's a strange story behind this. Because when we discovered this, we began to actually bury vials of water inside crop circles to find out if there was some energy that was imprinting itself on the water. Because the real crop circles, and not the rubbish made by people, because there is a lot of rubbish out there made by people, but the real ones, they always also favor water, either large deposits of underground water, rivers, streams, ponds, anything. In fact, the two biggest concentrations of crop circles in the world, which is southern Britain and the North American prairie, sit on the two of the world's deepest aquifers, and that's the connection. So when we began to bury bottles of water inside the crop circles and left some at home to use as control samples, we sent them off to Jacques Benveniste in France, or should I say the late Jacques Benveniste in France, who was the man who was single-handedly responsible for validating the scientific efficacy of homeopathy. And he found that, and by the way, he didn't know where the bottles came from because that would invalidate the experiment. They were just labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4, and etc. So he found that the bottles that inevitably had come from real crop circles were actually potentized anywhere up to 140% above the control samples. So the crop circles were inputting some energy into the actual water itself, which of course we know because people that walk into the real crop circles are having these heightened states of consciousness, just like they would do if they go into a temple or a stone circle.
Now, you had mentioned earlier about the different holy water spots. I just wanted to make a comment. I could have easily just put this in the chat room, but you took a breath, so oh well. I was just noticing that such holy water spots rarely have writing, which is odd considering they're a font. Oh, wait, I did.
It is odd. I don't know if I can really add anything to that, apart from the fact that so many of these sites are already electromagnetically active. Because we tend to go to them, they tend to get grounded quite easily. Conversely, when I've gone up to standing stones up in Wales in the middle of nowhere, and I know from maps and from just watching the local landscape that these stones haven't been touched in possibly hundreds of years, the first person that comes along and touches them, you get such a large shock from these things, you won't feel your forearm for 20 minutes. So you basically have downloaded the entire energy for several hundred years of what that stone has experienced around it. And believe me, it's like watching a movie for days. You can literally recreate events with crystal clear clarity. It's the weirdest thing I've ever experienced, and I'm not the only one who has. So, I think the more people that go to these sites, the more they do act as sort of discharges or grounding rods for the energy. So the connection with the lighting then goes away. It's that the lighting then goes and finds other places to discharge.
I think what we're going to do is take kind of a quick break and give everybody a second to go do whatever. And then we'll come back and talk some more with Freddy Silva. And he has another...
I'm going to drink holy water.
Oh, yeah. And Freddy has another book, but kind of looks like we're not going to be able to get to it tonight. So what we're going to have to do is reschedule Freddy for another time in the near future.
Oh,
I thought you were going to say we were going to read the book out.
We'll have a sort of fireside chat.
Yeah, exactly.
Chapter
Sit back.
1.
It's going to be a while.
So we're going to take a real quick break, and we'll be back in a few minutes. So stay tuned. Jeff?
Yes. Well, you're all listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with hosts Henry Foister, Kat Cloco, Seal and Cat, Barbara Duncan, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with our awesome erudite guest, Freddy Silva. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.
That's the Paranormal View with your host, Henry Foister, Jeffrey Gould, Kat Cloco, and Barbara Duncan. Every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the Para X Radio Network.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Paranormal View, here with your hosts, Henry Foister, Kat Cloco, Jeffrey Gould, and myself, Barbara Duncan, and our wonderful guest tonight, Freddy Silva. Freddy, I was mentioning before that I have water from Glastonbury. I have water from St. Fergus Well. Is it possible, if you can't visit the sacred sites, to bring the sites to you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, water would be one wonderful way of doing so, and you've already demonstrated that very well. But, one thing I always tell people in Glastonbury when we go there is drink the water, drink lots of it. It's very good for you.
Okay.
So in a way, you are sort of drinking the energy of the people that have gone before you, as well as the resident energy that is actually manifested at the site and also is modified by the site itself. The other thing you can do, and this really kind of goes back to the concept of crop circles as energy fields again. One of the things that occurred to me when I was doing the research into that was that, again, people don't always have the opportunity to go to these places and see real crop circles. So I thought, what would be great to sort of bring the crop circle to people? And we found out, and this is a very, very long story, which I'll cut short, found out that there are healing modalities available in crop circles, and the sacred spaces also have very rich histories of healing as well. And we conducted some experiments in Germany using a system of energy whereby you send energy across space and time to a very direct location. And this institute has been able to use images of crop circles to actually heal forests in distress and clear out polluted rivers and, of course, heal people as well. I developed something called the crop circle resonance cards, which achieves the same effort. And you can see those on my website, because it is a long story. So in essence, if the building itself, since we're talking about sacred space in general, if the building itself also resonates a certain energy and is imbued with a certain force, I would not be surprised if a picture of, say, Stonehenge, when you're trying to meditate on it, would have exactly the same effect. And if the picture should also be taken by you, or it should be an original photograph, it's as though there's an interaction between you and the site, and the picture is the mid-ground between the two. I think then that there's something about the energy that is actually trapped in that photograph, and it stays with you. And so whenever you use that as a focal point for meditation, say, like Egyptians used to use statues as a way to focus their intent about something, then yes, I think the energy of the site does come home to you, and you can interact with it. It's almost a sort of a gross way of thinking about it. For example, if you did meditation and just thought very clearly about the place where you try to connect with, there would also be a way for the energy of that place to also be within the aura of your own building where you happen to be doing the meditation. But of course, you have to you really believe it, and you have to be totally connected to that place in order to achieve that effect. So yes, I think once you start getting out of the physical world and get into the non-physical locality of things, which science now agrees is the way that the universe really works, then there's no reason to believe why you can't think it and believe it and intend the energy of a sacred space to be with you at all times, also on demand.
Now, we create our own sacred spaces within our own, well, I do anyway, at least. And I'm sure that those people who walk certain pathways do create our own sacred spaces within our own homes. Obviously, those aren't as powerful as the sites themselves, but they do create sort of a protection, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, it goes back to what I was saying about temple making, that I teach people how to create their own portal of energy wherever they live. The only difference between what you're creating and an ancient place of veneration is the fact that they have a few thousand years head start on you. But the energies is still the same. You're still working with the same laws. And the advice I always tell people is that if you've done the homework correctly, and in a couple of hours you can be up and running, it's not that difficult. You just have to know what you're doing. The advice I always tell people is be careful of what you ask when you go into these spaces that you build, because you may manifest it. And sometimes getting what you thought you wanted may not be the right thing. So you've got to sort out your thought process and make sure that what you want really is what your heart wants and not what your ego wants. The classic one being, I want that really attractive blonde across the street. Well, that's your head thinking. But, your heart really, when you check your gut feeling, is going, yeah, she's cute, but you know what? I don't think that's where I want to be. I want that brunette. I think she's really smart, and, she has a lot of the things that we're actually looking for. So if your head starts ruling your heart, then you will manifest that blonde, and then you'll find out pretty soon that wasn't what you wanted. So these things, although we're laughing about it, they are very potent. You can create your own temple and your own sacred portal in your own living room. I'm sitting in one right now. And again, you come here to my room, and you won't know it's here, but you will feel it. And that's how you start creating that sense of magic and power. And the more you do it, and the more people come and work with it, and the more the intent stays in the place, now you've got the makings of your own Stonehenge. And in a few thousand years, who knows? Maybe someone will actually build a major stone circle wherever you happen to live right now. So it's size doesn't necessarily mean power. It's the quality of energy and how much you work with it that creates a truly special place. And you'd be amazed how easy it really is to do.
Now, a lot of these temples that were built, were they built by, I don't know, secret groups kind of? And would there still maybe be some of them around that we don't know about?
Yes. I mean, they were certainly secret in the way that they kept themselves, their activities quiet, depending on who was in charge. So during the Catholic era, and especially during the Romans as well, you'd be very foolish to announce that you were actually working with pagan principles, because they would basically burn you alive. So I think after a few hundred years of this very painful process of trying to do your work while staying alive, people got smart, and they decided to go underground. And this is where you get so many conspiracy theories about Rosicrucians and Freemasons and Knights Templar. But actually, there's nothing very dramatic about it. It's just the fact that they didn't want to give away stuff to people that shouldn't know this stuff in the first place. And that was my conclusion when I began to look at the work on the Templar material that I was writing about. That, yes, they are guarding a huge secret, but it's no more secret than what the Egyptians were protecting in their inner brotherhood, which is the secrets of the mysteries, how to work with energy, and to give the information to only people who have a high degree of being responsible. So today, they're still around. They're called speculative Freemasons. You usually won't know who they are because they don't advertise the fact, but they'll know who you are. They'll be looking around you, making sure that they're looking for new initiates, people that they can trust. And for many, many years, when I moved back here to Maine from England, I actually didn't realize that for many years I had actually been friends with the head of the Masonic Institute of America, and he invited me to come to do a presentation. And naturally, I got very nervous about it, because I said, well, this stuff really goes down well with Freemasons. And they said, you'd be surprised how many groups of Freemasons still exist that still practice the old spiritual laws. And then there are those who are using it to basically manifest lots of money, special contacts, and essentially control the world. It's just energy. It's how you use it that determines its right action or wrong action. So, and they said to me, we've been keeping you under watch for a few years, and we'd like you to become, to join the group, which is a wonderful thing, except that I had to turn it down on the basis that I didn't want it to color my work, because if people realized that I was a Mason and I was writing material, they would think that somehow there's a bias behind it, and it would really color my work. And I like my work to stand by itself and to find its own middle ground. I don't preach to people. I tell people the facts, and I leave people to make up their own minds. And I think that's the healthiest way to go. So, yes, these people are still around. They exist in various guises and forms. Some of them are still making stone circles. There's one group of dowsers up in Vermont that has just built the most beautiful stone circle on the edge of Burlington, Vermont. And believe me, it's as close to the real thing as you will get, and they've really followed all the old laws, and you do get a buzz out of it. And then, of course, people are, as I said earlier, they are creating their own little temples inside their own houses. even if it's a little altar or something. And they form their own closed groups of friends, and they start doing what ancient people have done forever, which is have meetings regularly, talk about the things that matter, do prayer, incantation, and it builds up that quality of place. So it's much more prevalent than you think. There are groups everywhere working very quietly doing this.
Wasn't that kind of the definition of the Renaissance period, was that knowledge finally starting to filter down to more people because it was kept so quiet before, and it was kept very very much under wraps by the Catholic Church.
Oh, very much so. It's a good observation. The conditions for the Renaissance, there was a wonderful window of opportunity where suddenly the right people were empowered to allow these things to flourish. I mean, there were enlightened kings coming on the throne. Sometimes you get the odd pope that was totally with the plot. And in fact, one of them was actually put there by the Cistercians, who, of course, were the people that created the Knights Templar. So suddenly you have these windows of opportunity where all of us can suddenly stick our heads out of the ground without having them chopped off. And you have this wonderful period where things really did flourish, where good books were written. And it's, but that is the true story of humanity, though. There is this sort of seesaw effect that goes through the ages. And if you observe history closely, you'll see how sometimes it is right for people to come out and proclaim these divine rules loudly. And there are those times when wise people go underground and stay there and work quietly behind the scenes, under the radar, until the conditions are right again for things to pop up. And that's the way humanity will always be. It's always this sort of yin and yang. But that's part of the drama of being here, though. It's and also part of the frustration of being here as well.
Now, you talk about in your book the 7 sages. Can you expound a little bit on each one of those so we know what they entail?
Well, the 7 sages are very interesting people. They keep coming up in history, or should I say prehistory, again and again. They pop up in the Bible. The people who are basically Noah's family. But except that Noah seems to have a bit of a split personality, because the same guy shows up again and again and again in different Eastern myths by different names. And every single time that God asks this guy to build a boat and put an example of all the species on Earth inside it, he is asked also to take on board these groups of 7 sages. And these people are supposed to be to represent some knowledge of all the secret mysticism in the entire world. So along comes this enormous catastrophe that engulfed the world, which is now correctly dated to 9,703 BC. And these people survived. And throughout all of these cultures around the world, under different names, these 7 sages went walkabout, and it was their charge to rebuild, and I'm quoting this now from sacred texts, to rebuild the former mansions of the gods. And the whole idea was to basically put back on the face of the earth the sacred spaces, the hotspots of energy, so people would know where to connect with the gods, with a finer level of the universe, so that after they'd gone about rebuilding the world and doing their daily chores, they would also leave enough spiritual time to realize that not everything is based on physical values. There are laws out there and other worlds that you need to connect to make yourself whole. So they basically were the wisdom keepers that survived this great catastrophe that we should be thankful for this entire temple culture that we've inherited around the world. And it is amazing how so many, I'm talking hundreds of different myths and legends and actual books and even scripts in temple walls describe these groups of people in different parts of the world. And there's one of them which actually gives a very good description, and it's in the Temple of Edfu in Egypt. They call them by a different name. They call them the Akku Shemsu Hor, and it literally means the followers of Horus. And again, there were 7 in number, and there's this description on the temple wall that actually describes them as being 12 feet tall. And sometimes I wonder whether, they were 15 feet tall. It's 3 cubits in height. And sometimes I wonder where some of these statues in the temples of Egypt, which are very, very tall, about 15 feet, aren't actually depicting these actual gods that survived this incredible catastrophe. And if you follow the story on the temple walls further, it says that after they built the primordial mounds and established the original seats of the gods, which would form the foundations of the historical temples, that is the ones that we see today, that they then went walkabout throughout the rest of the earth, and they rebuilt the other centers and other seeds of civilization. So it was as though places like Egypt and Sumeria and the Far East, South America, all of these places were little hotspots where people survived this global catastrophe, and it was from these centers that the cult of the temple slowly spread out across the world. You're all deep in thought and very quiet. I like it.
It's a lot of interesting information.
Yeah, it is. Now,
So now, essentially, what I'm looking at under the seven sages is they seem to be Grecian in origin. Are they in other cultures as well, or mainly through there?
They're all in other cultures. They call them by different names, and they come in various guises, but essentially they're all 7 in number, which is essentially a metaphor of the music scale, and also the 7 colors of light that we see. So all of this is not by accident. All these metaphors are meant to mean something. But they do, even in South America, they also appear with Viracocha and the 7 shining ones that come over this floating ship over the horizon. They land in Tiwanaku. They build this incredible temple, which is now dated to 15,000 BC. And it was from there that they went off to promulgate the knowledge of the gods to the rest of mankind. And it was thanks to them that they built all the culture of temples in South America. So they do pop up everywhere, and I do believe to some degree they also appear in Native American lore. But that one is much more of a oral tradition. You really have to know the right people in Native American tradition for them to be able to tell you these things, and they don't rebuild the stuff lightly.
But oddly enough, the musical scale is actually 8 notes, hence being called an octave.
Yeah, but the 8 is the repetition of the first, so there are 7 notes technically.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Very true. It's interesting because as you're talking about this, I'm thinking to Close Encounters and the talking with aliens, and it was all done through musical notes.
Yes, exactly.
And it seems to be, we keep coming back to energy and vibration as being the main means of communication.
Well, here's a funny thing, and I'm glad you brought that up because it stirred my memory about something I wrote years ago in my first book about the crop circles. And I really wasn't looking for it. I got pretty close to understanding that crop circles are by and large made with sound. And I dedicate a whole chapter to proving that, and it's never been disproved, so I accept that it still holds water. When I was looking at certain connections to why the crop circles would be made with sound, and why so many of these references are made in sacred texts, that in order for the creator to make life, it's always to do with sound and light, the principal forms of creation of the universe. I also discovered that there are certain notes that are found within crop circles, and all the notes correspond to the diatonic music scale, which is essentially the do-re-mi. Now, we may think of the do-re-mi as essentially a Western creation, and to a certain degree it is, because different cultures have different music scales. So the do-re-mi in China makes absolutely no sense. In India, it doesn't make even less sense, because they work with half notes, which to our ears sounds really weird. But the funny thing is, there was a wonderful gentleman called Yehudi Menuhin, and he actually did some unusual research onto why it is that every single child around the world, before they've had a chance to learn sound with words, they sing in the notes of the diatonic music scale. In other words, the do-re-mi seems to be inherent in the actual human DNA. It's something that we're all born with before we actually learn how to formulate words in our own specific culture. So when you have sacred sites which are tuned to musical notes or sounds, or you have crop circles that are working with sound, but also because of their geometry, they also have inherent specific notes in their geometries. And why these places, both temples and crop circles, have such a profound effect on people, well, now there's that commonality, there's that common touching point, because those notes are inherent in who we are. So if you're going to try to talk to a species which seems to be precocious and hard to get along with in the first place, the path of least resistance, if the people that you're trying to connect with don't accept their visions and their imagination as being communications from a finer universe, then you communicate with them through music, the basic notes of the music scale, because those are hardwired inside you, and you'll know what they mean when you hear them.
So you mean sort of like the way the walls of Jericho were felled by an apparent sonic weapon?
Absolutely. If you find the right vibration of any object, you can either do profound things with it or you can destroy it. There's a wonderful case in France about 100 years ago when they were trying to figure out why it is that the French policeman's whistle could be heard across more blocks in the city than any other whistle in the world. And they built a large version of it in a laboratory. They pumped compressed air into it. And all they heard was this loud noise and this thud where the technician just collapsed dead. And they found that the sound frequency generated by that whistle liquefied the technician from the inside.
Wow.
That's how you not work with sound. When you get to Princeton was
the
looking
CIA
into all
not
of
being
this.
used to.
Well, Princeton were fascinated by the interaction between spirituality and consciousness and science. And they wanted to find out why it is that so many sacred sites around the world do have these connections with sound and music. And part of the connection was to do with the type of stone that was used, as well as how it was arranged geometrically. Because when you arrange a room in a certain geometric shape, you are inherently generating ratios which are mathematical, which then relate to the music scale. So when they actually took a piece of quartz, which is the fundamental matter in all of these sacred sites, when they put it into a tube and threw sound at it, they actually got the quartz to levitate. So there's your answer. When you actually find the right frequency of an object and you match it, you can actually create a counter-gravitational effect.
Really? Wonder if that's the way they might be able to make spaceships fly.
Absolutely, which brings us back to our original question about Star Close Encounters. I think Spielberg was channeling much more of that film than he gives himself credit for, because some of those balls of light that you see when the spaceships cross through the toll booths, and at the end you got that little mischievous red ball. I have seen so many of those things flying around Wiltshire, around crop circles and stone circles, and even inside cathedrals, and even the priests have seen them. If I had known how close to life that film is, I probably wouldn't have got involved in this.
Wow. So I know that there's a sound frequency that they're trying to perfect for crowd control, which essentially will loosen people's bowels.
The brown note.
The brown note.
It's called the brown note.
Oh,
yeah.
It was originally called like black noise, but then it became called the brown note. Yeah.
I thought only ayahuasca did that to you. It is funny that again, it's all about energy. It's how you use it. You can use it for right action or wrong action. And again, if we use common ideas as a metaphor, Star Wars is a wonderful way to describe this. Where we think of Star Wars as being about Luke Skywalker, but it's not really. It's about the redemption of Darth Vader. Here's a guy that starts off working with energy for right action. He gets seduced by the dark side, and yet at the very end, he has the opportunity to come back to the light, and he does. He gets it. He realizes he's been wrong all along to go and use it for nefarious purposes. So, and that's the important thing to keep in mind, that there is sort of good and bad in all this stuff, and a wise person knows the difference between the two.
Well, now, are there some books that talk about these different vibrations and how to use them, and can you make things levitate by doing it?
Well, I think Princeton got very close to this. I don't think they took it any stage further. In fact, I don't even know if that particular group in Princeton still exists. I think the funding problem probably shut them down. And the main principal person that was working on it, which is a man called Jan, that's Jahn. He was the one that was responsible for making these connections between science and mysticism. I think they took it as far as they could into understanding how the prime element in all in the stones in most of the sacred sites around the world was this specific type of quartz. which just turns out that the type of quartz used in the stones at Stonehenge is exactly the same type that's used in early radio receivers. When Princeton locked onto this and was able to find the right frequency to levitate that piece of quartz, I think they really were touching upon something. Just as there are institutes around Europe which have been using sound frequency for the best part of 100 years to heal people, and yet they're not really allowed to talk much about it. I mean, that kind of stuff is even banned here in America, and yet in Europe they use sound healing quite readily, and all they're doing is finding out which frequencies ally with the human body and get either things to go away, diseases to go away, or they can improve the vitality of some organs. I mean, to this day, we are now using ultrasound, for example, to heal bone fractures in hospitals. So clearly, this information is everywhere. You just have to look for it. I don't think there's one specific source that lists everything, because the subject is so vast and still so discombobulated that it hasn't yet been sort of grouped together. And now that I've just said that sounds like a good idea for a book. Bringing all these things together. And I have been thinking about doing a book on sound for many years, actually. So, yes, it is. You just have to go look for it in the right places. And, again, discernment is a wonderful tool, because there is also a lot of nonsense out there.
Sure.
But if you just take the myths and legends and put it next to the science that's being done today, that suddenly there is a big story there to do with sound and how frequency does shape or unshape material forces.
Now,
So
Go ahead.
the placement of the quartz in the home where you have a certain shape, a pentagram, for example, and the vibration that they're all working on, and also the interpretation or the relationship they have to each other, that correlates a lot to the sacred sites, correct?
Absolutely.
So
and it's all based on the observation of sacred sites. Yeah.
Okay. So the Stonehenge, basically, all of those stones are talking to each other, relating to each other, with the energy that they're communicating with.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there are many cultures that actually describe the temple not as a physical object, but as an animate being. In Egypt, in the old days, the priests used to go around before dawn, waking up each chamber as though it is an actual living being that has been aroused from sleep. They didn't see the temple as being physical at all. They recognized it as for what it was, a living, breathing organism, and you respect it like a person. You treat it like a person, and you address it as such. And they would talk to it, they would sing to it. And when you go to Stonehenge and you walk around with 1,000 people listening to their little walkie-talkies that 1,000 slaves built this place, and you think, why would slaves do this? I mean, this is a monument built with love. You just take a look at it and you think that there's no way this was done by duress or by hatred. This was done with love. And yet the temple seems very humdrum when you're walking around. It doesn't feel like it's woken up. It's like it doesn't want to be taken for granted. It feels like a bunch of rocks. But when you go in the evening and you've got your special access and you go there at night quietly, the place is different because it feels that you are there to respect it. And believe me, saying this sounds a little crazy on radio, but when you go there and you respect it and you go there and show it the proper respect, the place comes alive. It's bigger than it actually seems in real life. And you do feel you are being surrounded by these very large entities, and they are there to help. They want to be asked questions. And I cannot honestly think of any situation where anyone has not come back from that place feeling absolutely altered, which is the reason why we have altars in temples, because they are there to alter you. And so, yes, the stones are living organisms. They are living, breathing things. And there was a gentleman in France years ago that measured the frequency in the stones in Karnak in France. And he was an electrical engineer. He was a real skeptic. He was not into woo-woo at all. And he came to the conclusion that all of the rocks are basically vibrating. And they breathe in, they breathe out. In the morning, they're surrounded by a massive electrical field. They discharge every so many 70 minutes or so, and then they recharge again. And if they're not discharged after a certain amount of time by lightning, the first person that comes along, it gives them an electric shock. And this is a real hard-nosed scientist talking about the 8,000 stones at Karnak, that these things are moving, they are vibrating, and they're living. So if the scientists are saying this, we are not making this stuff up.
Now, would that be vibrating like maybe a tuning fork or something like that?
Very much so. If you listen very closely, they actually do have a hum, and you really have to listen in perfect quietness. And this is one of the reasons why there's so many folklores around all of these sites that link them to sound, and the fact that they tend to move during the night, drink the water, and then they come back to their proper places in the morning. These stories are all around the world by people who supposedly didn't talk to each other, but they describe the same thing, that these things are like antennas, they're like tuning forks. Their shape and size and their relationship to each other reflects a different kind of energy, a different frequency, and each one of them draws you to their bosom for a different reason all the time. And I don't think they were making it up. I think when you go to these places and you experience them, it really is quite true. I've never been to, I've seen so many standing stones, and each one of them is totally different. And you'd think that you'd be bored going to these sites, but you never are. They really have their own personality. They have their own characteristic and feeling and energy, and each one of them will elicit a different state in you.
Wow. Well, I hate to say it, but our time has just zipped right on through.
Oh,
and,
no.
I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. I mean, it doesn't seem like 2 hours because it's gone by real fast, but
that's the other thing about these things. It's missing time.
It's missing
with sacred sites. So now you know.
I want to thank you again for being on, and I want you to stay on till after we're off, and we'll talk with you for a few minutes and thank you. But right now, why don't you give out your sites where they can get your books and read all about you and follow you and all that good stuff?
I think that's a good idea. There's nothing better to do, and winter's coming along anyway. You want a couple of very, very thick books on your table for those dark nights, and you can find them at invisibletemple.com. And there's all kinds of little freebies there, free chapters and things, all kinds of offers. There's DVDs and things, and there's lots of free information, and that should keep you out of mischief and away from texting silly messages for quite a while. Unless you're texting messages about my work, and then I don't really care. I've had I got talked into buying a cell phone, and I think I make 2 phone calls every year. I actually use it as an iPod. It's so wonderful.
Wow.
I've never texted.
I don't do that either, and that's why I don't care for an iPhone. So don't really need them. But Jeff, won't you give out
make it look very intelligent, though, for some reason.
Absolutely. Well, you can go to my website at jeffgould.net, GEOFFGOULD.net/2011 PNV. That's 2011 PNV.htm. And that'll be my Paranormal View hub page, which will have all of the links to each of the report pages, previous shows, archived podcasts, both there and on respective report pages. For instance, tonight's report page will have links to Freddy's books and a few of his DVDs. Our official website is paranormalview.com. If you go to Facebook, just do a search for the Paranormal View. There we are. You can also do a search for Jeffrey Gould Career Progress Group. Feel free to join for updates on my acting stuff. And for anyone with health issues or realizing they're just plain aging, just check out the website isq4u.com. That's isqforyu.com, and message me at Facebook or email me at realbadger@earthlink.net. There you go.
Kat?
Okay, everyone, you can follow my paranormal adventures at www.catcloco.com, KATKLOCKOW, or follow my graphic novel at huntforghosts.com. I just put up the link for my Facebook group, Miss Gray Manga, which is the Facebook fan page for my graphic novel. That's just facebook.com/MISSGREYMANGA.
And Cece?
Facebook page, cemetery photos, the usual.
Yeah, but you can't find you by typing in.
You have to do Ellen Smithy.
Ellen Smithy. Okay. That's the way to find it. Or you can look up Henry Foister, and you can find a link on my friends list over to her, along with everybody else. So With that, I do want to thank Freddie again for being on, and I want to thank all those for taking time to be with us and listening tonight. Next week, we will be having a tarot reader by the name of Nyla, who will be on for a while with us. And so tune in next week if you want to try and get a reading. And till then, we're going to jump off of here. This is Henry Foister,
Jeffrey Gould,
Barbara Duncan,
and Kat Cloco.
And we will see you next week at the same time. Good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.